Hello and thank you. Synopsis 2021 is more than honored to have Khalid Howladar and Jillian Godsil. Khalid Howladar is one of the shining beacon in Islamic finance with over 2 decades of experience, and he's the chairman of governance board of Marhaba. And Jillian Godsil is the crypto advocate, keynote speaker, journalist, influencer, and she's the member of governance board at Marhaba. Thank you both of you for joining Synopsis 2021. We are simply excited and thrilled having you on our panel. And I'm more than honored to be the one actually leading the conversation with you.
Thanks, Amirsan.
Thank you, Khalid. Thank you so much. So Khalid, we have been in touch for almost months now. And the more I got into your expertise, the more I was fascinated. With 25 years of experience in Islamic finance, working with world-class corporations, companies, advising, developing policies, how did you move from centralized finance to DeFi?
Good question. If you'd asked me 5 years ago when I started my own firm, I would not have remotely envisaged where I was. So as you said, look, my background is 20 years of traditional finance, mostly defined by 15 years at Moody's. And Moody's gives you a very sort of disciplined sort of mindset. As you guys may know, they've nicknamed me the chief negative officer at Marhaba, because I'm always the guy that's looking for problems, looking for risks. And that kind of suits, I guess, my career. But then 5 years ago, when I started my own consulting firm, Accreditus, I actually started also angel investing. I look at my own personal wealth and what I was doing with my money. And frankly, I didn't think I was doing anything particularly constructive. And I thought entrepreneurship, innovation, these are things that I want to support. And it's not been, I can't say it's been a very carefully planned strategy. It's mostly driven by my social network. So people who I trust, people who I know, and that's the first thing. Trust is always the hardest and the most important thing, I think, in investing. And then if they're doing something interesting, I tend to sort of get involved. And I wouldn't just say I'm an investor. I'm also more of almost like a venture builder. I've heard that term because I try to get involved with my sort of different background, my skill set. Mostly startup people are optimists, dreamers, aspirational, and I'm the guy who tries to bring you down to earth. And you know what? If we meet in the middle, then we're probably in a good spot. And I've invested also in another crypto project. It's not yet public, but that's sort of green EV electric vehicle type, utility project, and that was a while ago. But my experience of crypto, I'm an expert in fiat money and debt, and I see the way the world is heading. And so crypto for me opens up a new opportunity to have a different system. And then from that, you kind of get this evolution to crypto finance, and then DeFi, which for me, and this is where maybe it ties into a bit, themes of Islamic finance, social inequality, wealth inequality, debt, leverage, all these global problems. At the heart of a lot of these problems, I'm not an anarchist, but sits government and a political agenda, in whether it's Brexit or Trump or whatever, where you effectively see the social and financial system not manipulated, but favored for the benefit of the few over the many. And DeFi offers an idealistic promise of a peer-to-peer economic system where, frankly, we can get wealthy and generate value without ever having to go to the guy in the middle who just sits there collecting, or lady in the middle, I should say, collecting rents from the rest of us. If it's done right, if it's done well, it can genuinely be that empowering financial social system. Done badly, it's a horrendous opportunity to scam people, rob people. You can lose your money. So we've got to be really careful about consumer protection, money laundering, all these things that DeFi doesn't like, frankly. So because I had that kind of agenda, when the CEO of Marhaba came knocking on my door for the third time, because I'd sort of turned him down the first two because it was a bit too fringe and not ready. The third time I felt there was enough critical mass of ideas, of tech, of willingness, of intention. And I initially came on board as a sort of advisor, but then what they're doing, I believe, is frankly possibly world changing. So I felt it was just something I had to be more involved in. So both from an investment side and from an advisory side, have taken on a pretty active role and very excited to be part of it. So I hope that's a long way of answering your question.
It is, but that's very insightful. That's very insightful. Thank you. Jillian, given the advantages and disadvantages that Khalid just mentioned, you are among the 50 most influential females in the blockchain. What is your take on Khalid's opinion, and how did you end up in blockchain? Because you're in industry for almost 10 years, if not more.
Well, we kind of came the same route, although mine was a bit more painful, I think, than Khaled's. I've got like 35 plus years experience in working in fintech and in working in PR, marketing, and then increasingly moved over towards journalism. And in the middle, I had a bit of an interesting 10 years, shall we say, when I hit divorce, home, repossession, bankruptcy, bailiffs, the whole thing. The 2008 crash bulldozed through me in a major way. And when that happened, a bit like what Khalid was saying, but from a different perspective, I suddenly went, oh, hang on, because you don't really think about things unless you're in the middle of it. And I went, wow, there's all this income inequality. There's all this, when I was growing up, I knew that we had this idea that, if you worked hard enough and you got education, you could do anywhere, you could go anywhere, and you could probably do better than your parents. And then I suddenly realized when I was going through all this terrible stuff, it was just personally terrible. I went, whoa, that's no longer true. The world has moved again, and it's no longer kids nowadays who are working hard, have got an education. They probably have huge college debt if they're American. So it's really, really, really tough on kids now. The whole world is not working correctly. So I had my stint of activism. I wasn't an anarchist. I'm too old to be an anarchist. So I had my stint of activism. And then I came across blockchain and I went, whoa, this makes sense. This is how I can help my children, but also everybody's children. And I think that's what I really like about this is that, I lived through the dot-com boom. Very interesting time, really very interesting. It was interesting because there was a lot of innovation, technical innovation, some amazing stuff. I mean, think back now, when the internet first came and web pages, people said, oh, I wouldn't buy clothes online. I wouldn't buy a book online. I mean, like, that is so bizarre. I think we even thought those ways in the 90s. And so it was innovative. They were different ways of thinking, very, very clever. And what's happening in this technical revolution, which I think is interesting, is that there is a real desire to make the world a better place. So those things about income inequality, fresh water, housing, remittances, all these things that are plaguing the world at the moment, there's a genuine desire for people working in the space to say, do you know what? We can do better. We can bring people into the system. We can, well, actually, or maybe take them out of the system, I don't want to look at it, but we can help more people. Because what I always say, when I say about making the world a better place, they go, I'm not a hippy dippy, because there is enough food, for example. There's enough food to feed the world. We don't, because there isn't the political will, it's not the right distribution, the whole range of reasons why it's not happening, or even the attempt of it happening is not happening. But we could do it if we really wanted to. And for me, blockchain is that thing, and DeFi and crypto and all. It's the scales that fell from my eyes, and I went, whoa, this is liberating. It's empowering. It gives women extra choices. And you said, I'm very passionate in this space, so I do end up on lists where I'm with the women, and other people too as well. But I love the fact that women can be empowered, and the disenfranchised can be empowered. So that's where I'm coming from. I just love this space, and it's not all plain sailing. And actually, Khalid made the comment that there are scams, and it's new, and it's a bit Wild Westy. So it's not, an innocent place per se, but it's an exciting place and has the potential to do amazing things.
Well, as a being among the 50 most influential females in blockchain, there are a lot of projects that reach out to you, but at the end of the day, you decided to become a member of governance board at Marhaba. What was that journey like, and why did you decide to join the project?
Well, I have to say the CEO is an amazing man, and I have such admiration for him. He's just a patient. I really like him. And again, it goes back to what Khalid was saying, that it's trust, it's people that you like. So I've known him for a long time. I know when the project took off, and I wasn't able to join initially. But the project, what I didn't realize, this is something, again, you don't know these things until you go through that. I was advocating for women and for the disenfranchised to be able to access blockchain and the various tools and money, whatever, access to credit, all the different things that it can offer. And I didn't realize, and unlike, I had no idea about Islamic finance at all. So I didn't realize that Muslims were living a life that they didn't feel comfortable using traditional or Western finance, and they wanted to use finance that suited them. And I went, whoa, another billion people who were outside the circle of crypto. And I had no idea. I mean, I'm learning all the time. I had no idea that was the case. And I thought, whoa, there needs to be something, because that's 1 million people who can't benefit from what I think is the most amazing, democratizing, fantastic technology and potential to earn money. It's potential, because how do ordinary people get access to credit? How do ordinary people who are maybe on the breadline, or who don't, how do ordinary people just go up in the world nowadays? You can't in the traditional world. I say it's very broken. So anyway, I went, yeah, okay. And another 1 billion people to sort out. I'm in.
Well, thank you so much, Jillian. Thank you so much. Khalid, probably you are the best person, not probably, for sure you are the best person to educate our audience. What are the differences, the major differences between the Islamic finance versus the traditional finance, and why it matters?
Sure. Well, look, firstly, I'm always happy to announce that, firstly, the main principle is that of debt and lending. And the idea that you shouldn't make money out of other people's indebtedness. And also from my time at Moody's, where I was at the ringside seat of the financial crisis, the financial crisis was probably one of the first where morality, ethics, and greed really came to the fore. And I saw firsthand what happens when you have misaligned incentive structures. So I get rich when you get poor, you bear the losses, I keep the winnings. This type of mentality, this winner sort of take all. And when it comes to debt, especially personal debt, there's no in it together type thinking. I'm actually, as the person with the money, I'm incentivized to load you up with as much debt as possible to your breaking point. So I actually kind of get richer from interest sort of based income, while you effectively get poorer. Now, ordinarily, if people are educated and are well-versed in personal finance, which most people are not, I actually think it's a crime that you might learn geography, history, French at school, but you don't learn about personal finance. It's unbelievable. It's the number one thing, in my view, that destroys families, that destroys people's livelihoods, depression. There's so many consequences of indebtedness, suicide, etc. So when you have an interest debt-based system, I just fundamentally misaligns you. And those with money just want to load up people. And what we've done in the West, we've created a consumption-driven system where, for economic growth and supposed shared prosperity, we convince people to buy things they don't need with money they don't have. And if ever you stopped buying that plasma TV or the next iPhone or the next car, the whole system would grind to a halt, because all the people working, building plasma TVs and building extra cars wouldn't have jobs. So we've built this pyramid of debt-based consumption that is unsustainable. And a lot of that is driven by the fact that as banks, we create money from nothing whatsoever. We lend it and we make profit having actually done very little work whatsoever. So it actually goes back to almost fundamental ethics, society, even sustainability. There's a huge thing now about sustainability and, you know, save planet and conserving. I had an epiphany about 6 months ago. With all this money printing going on, if you have an infinite supply of money, that means infinite consumption. You actually cannot have a sustainable planet when you just create infinite money, because the money has no cost. Before, and this is a bit anachronistic, when money was backed by gold, there was actually a limit to how much money you could create. You needed something physical and valuable. But now we broke from that in the 70s. You know, Richard Nixon, following the Vietnam War and running the country into debt, figured, I can't afford this. Let me just break the gold standard. And now we've got all the governments in the world have now got this free pot of money where they can just keep printing and destroying the system. So going back, sorry, a long way back to your question, if economic activity, debt in Islam has to be backed by something. You can't raise unsecured debt. So you can raise debt to build a business or to buy a house or buy a car, but it's always got to be against something physical. I won't fund you just to go out and spend money on consumption. So it's a natural break on economic activity. Some will say, oh, it means you grow slower, but it just means you grow in a more stable way. So when you have that prohibition of interest, and my original point was actually the Muslims didn't invent this. The Christians, the Jews, and even before them, the Greeks had this. And I kind of believe that 2,000 years of learning or thought went into that. And then we kind of threw it all in the bin in the name of banking, consumerism, and debt and lending. And look where we are today. Global debt to GDP is, I think, 360%. That money is never, ever going to get paid back. We can either default, or what the governments are doing, printing money. And what's happening is asset prices are going up. So the rich are getting richer. And if middle and low incomes tend to have more money in cash. And so this trend of inequality is being massively exaggerated like never before. So in a system as Marhaba, where we don't engage in any interest-based lending, it's about trading, investment, a global financial system or a complementary system, which doesn't involve debt and lending, is one that I think works and satisfies a lot of concerns that Jillian has raised. Now, it's not just about interest. Just to quickly mention ethics, fairness, social justice, arms dealing, pornography, drugs, all those things of thou shalt not, they're all there as well. But people say, oh, those are anachronistic. Those are morals, religion. They don't have any space in today's modern society. But I think our modern society is a failure of ethics and a failure of social justice. And maybe religion, as kind of, quirky and as old as it sounds, maybe has something to teach us about a more ethical way. And that's kind of the hope. And technology, combining the latest in technology with ethics, I think probably gets us to that place, that sort of utopian ideal, at least the first steps of that we're hoping to go. But we're still a long way from that. So, watch this space.
Well, thank you for that very insightful answer, but I had one clarifying question. During our earlier discussions, you mentioned several times that Islamic finance amounts for $3 trillion. And when it comes to DeFi, it's zero. And DeFi, by definition, primarily most of the projects that I have seen, interest-based. Now we're talking about Marhaba, the first ethical, inclusive, Sharia-compliant project. How Marhaba is going to bring this novelty in Islamic finance of $3 trillion and at least accessing 1% of $3 trillion.
So look, the 3 trillion number is interesting because usually if you're building a business, you speculate as to what is the market, what's the potential. Luckily with Marhaba, there are so many strong metrics around Sharia sensitive banking and Sharia sensitive investment that we actually have a number. There's $3 trillion where people have chosen to bank Islamically because of faith, ethics, value, etc. So that's our number. Now, a lot of that 3 trillion is actually replicating interest mechanisms. So it's not quite the ideal, but at least the intention of parties is there. Now, when you get to DeFi, of course, lending and credit and yield farming is probably one of the highest sources of returns. And I actually think we're just importing the problems of the existing financial system into DeFi. We're just, without consumer protection, people will end up taking massive crypto loans. They'll be indebted. They'll lose. You know, there's as Jillian said, it's a wild west. It's not a safe place for the average person. Now, but there are other ways for protocols to make money. Trading, staking are 2 very simple ones. Islam encourages that financing, you be rewarded for creating some kind of tangible value or economic activity. So pure unsecured lending is non-compliant, but funding a business, taking a share of the profits is compliant. So for example, for me, if you know, if I was in charge of Amazon, every employee should have equity. Jeff Bezos doesn't need to be worth 50 billion. You know what? He could leave him 20 billion just for himself. The other 30 billion should be accruing to the people who work on the factory floor. Now imagine you had an economic system where people were sharing in the wealth. Suddenly Amazon single-handedly would have taken 200,000 people above the poverty line. So, but we're in this system where profits are not shared. So in DeFi, if you're making profits through trading, providing liquidity pools for halal tokens to be exchanged, etc., you're providing a service. You're acting like a currency exchange in a way by providing this, you know, buying and selling service, and you're entitled to a share, a percentage of that volume. So that's one source of halal returns. And there's so much fragmentation in DeFi, so much fragmentation in crypto, that actually lots of liquidity pools, you know, providing currency or, you know, cryptocurrency exchange is actually a valuable service. Then you get to staking, and people said, oh, but isn't that lending and so on? But if you think about each chain as a network that needs maintenance, that rather than paying 1 million IT guys to be on the payroll, you actually reward independent people to be your validators on the network, to confirm transactions, to validate transactions. They're providing an economic service, maintenance, servicing, tech, whatever you want to call it, but they're doing something. They're not just borrowing money and lending, and they're getting rewarded in coins. So staking is, for me, and our Sharia board, is a form of economic activity, and you're entitled to be rewarded for that. So it does narrow the field, for sure. Marhaba cannot make money the same way as every other platform, and that probably means we might not make as much money, but the money we make, we believe, is in a more ethical, halal way. And even our initial products, we're not even going to try and offer the risky products, the altcoin products, into our community. We'll go for stablecoin products because we don't want retail to lose money. But even if you're making in crypto low returns of 5 to 15, these are extraordinary compared to what people are making from their banks, which is 0. So if we can offer a relatively low risk crypto product, giving people 5–10% return in a safe way, in a protected way, then even the average person is entitled to earn some decent return on their savings rather than watching it get destroyed by inflation through money printing. So again, I probably answered your question in a really long way, but I keep going off of these random tangents. But hopefully,
if I can jump in, 2 things jumped out of me when you were speaking there. Well, 3 things actually. Reward and sharing. I'm going, that sounds very nice to me, because I also don't believe in, like, for me to win, for you to lose. That doesn't make any sense to my head whatsoever. What I love too as well, you mentioned Jeff Bezos and Amazon. In a recent interview, someone said that to him, would you not give, $1 billion away to your employees? And he went, why should I? alarm bells. And then you compare that with, you probably come across Dan Price. He runs a payment, I think it's called Gravity Payments. He's Seattle, I think. And a number of years ago, he decided to take $1 million pay cut for himself to ensure that everybody in his company was paid 70 grand minimum. That was their minimum wage. And people at the time, they called him a communist and socialist, all these misuse of terms. And they said, oh, it'll all go to bust. What's happened? His company really successful. Productivity's gone through the roof. And why not? They've also had loads of babies because people can afford to buy their houses. But he's got a committed workforce. And that is, I just think this man is amazing. He'd come up with so many different things. I'm going, yeah, and then actually in turn, I think actually the staff all got together and bought him a Tesla as a thanks because they had extra money. And I think his salary's gone up again, but it's not, in the old world, the CEO earns multiples of the secretary, of the cleaner, of the person down the line, and pays a tiny amount of tax. That just doesn't make sense. And it's not, I'm not against people being successful. Everybody wants to be successful. That's a real given thing you want to do. But again, I don't want to be successful at somebody else's expense. That to me is what I love about this industry. And I love the way that Khalid explains about the finance, how it's done in Marhaba. I'm going, this is something that I really, really like.
Well, Jillian, during your career, you have met hundreds of people. Some of them good friends. You interviewed some of the influential people, and there are those people that remain based on their activities or legacy. What are the people, or who are those people that had that enormous social impact within the space, be it the crypto or DeFi or blockchain, that you think are worthy of spreading the word about?
Well, one of the first people that I came across in this industry, Dan Tapscott, with his son, he wrote the book, I think it's Blockchain for Beginners, whatever, but he did a TED talk back in 2008, I think, where he explained why this technology was so important. And when you first come into this industry, it is a bit confusing. I mean, like, we're all used to the terms now and it makes sense, and decentralization and DeFi, and we kind of know all this stuff. But at first it does seem a bit counterintuitive. It doesn't seem right. His TED talk is amazing. And actually I interviewed him recently, and he was saying, because of now the interest in crypto again, it's growing. It's like 3,000 views every day. It's going up and up and up. So he's an amazing man. I love Alex Mashinsky, Celsius. He's obviously a serial US entrepreneur who put the Wi-Fi in the subway. And he's running Celsius, which is another banking organization. The idea that it's making it accessible for everybody. Who else? I actually interviewed the late John McAfee, and I know he's a very large character, I think is the best way to describe where he was. But we spoke about poetry, and he's a larger than life character, and he did a lot of very funny things that I'm not, but an interesting man, because sometimes you need giants, even like kind of unusual ones, to just talk about things. And I'm sorry of his passing. And who else? Liberland, it's a micronation between Croatia and Serbia, and I know the president very well there. And I love the fact of a new country, it's a micronation, born without bloodshed. How nice is that? There were no wars. There's just, they're there. I haven't quite got the UN recognition, but that's a really interesting project too as well. Rethinking how you do stuff and using blockchain to provide the governance for the country, how it's run. And loads of interesting. Bridget Greenwood is a woman based out of the UK who set up the Bigger Pie. And she's a woman very much after my own heart, because she's there to help promote women, because there aren't enough women in the space. There's only like 8% women in the space, and we do need more. And an amazing, affirmative, very quiet, modest woman in many ways. She's very intelligent, but she is a great support to, and it's not just UK women, obviously I'm Irish, but a lot of other nationalities. So there's so many. I don't know. I don't know where. And what I love too as well, I'm very lucky because I'm a journalist in the space, and because it's such a nascent industry, I get to interview all these big names. I mean, if I was trying to interview, the head of IBM, whatever, or Coca-Cola, whatever, I wouldn't get near them. I'd have to be the senior editor at the FT to get near all these top names. And because it's such a new industry, I have the absolute privilege to talk to people who are at the top of their game and doing amazing things. And it's not always just the big exciting ones. You meet young people who are just passionate. I met this young chap recently, Jonathan, and I can't remember, but his company is Suco, and it's basically supply chain. So it's using blockchain to do supply chain. But what I love about what he's doing is that he goes back, obviously conscious consumers want to know where this product is coming from. his emphasis is on the farmers at the far end, and a farmer might only have a few acres. And he does two things. One, he rewards them in tokens for providing the data so that us folk at the top end of the chain can feel happy about. But also he does things where he gives them access to microloans. I remember talking at the time, and he said, Jilly said that when you hear microloan, and maybe it's 50 euros, whatever, he said, in actual fact, he said, that is a loan. That farmer, that might be 50 euros or $50, might be enough to buy the seed for her small holding, or to buy some livestock. And that puts a whole new context on things when you go, whoa, that's important. So I am very privileged and I love what I do. I love it. I love meeting people and interviewing people, and big, small. They're just so passionate in the space. It's just, I'm very privileged.
Fantastic. Well, Jillian, if you were the one to start a project yourself in DeFi or in crypto or in blockchain, what project would you start, and why would that matter? Unless you had already started, or unless you were thinking about it.
There is one that I've interviewed people who've got different ideas, and none of them sort of carried through. But when I mentioned that I went through the banks taking my home and becoming bankrupt and all the rest of it, and I was never actually homeless. Now, I was lost my home, but I was never actually out on the street. Myself and my two kids always had roofs over our heads, and we supported family and friends. So I was never actually out on the street. And I know for a period I was singing with the Island of Ireland Peace Choir, and they were very much active with the Hope Choir, is that right? Hope Choir, where people who were homeless came out and were singing. And then I met people, we sang with them, people who'd actually spent years on the streets, and the devastation that it put on them. So I would love a project, because I volunteer at quite a few charities. I'm on a board of a charity here in Ireland too as well. I volunteer on the board. But sometimes I think there's so many charities involved with homelessness. I don't know, they seem to suck out a lot of money. There's more money spent on people working in homeless than there is on the people. And I don't know, I've spoken to people with sort of ideas, but how do you take out the middlemen? Do you know what I mean? The very well-meaning people working homeless, and just help the people directly. So if I come across something like that, I'm in. Another one I'm in. Because I think there has to be a better way of doing it, because I know Jesus would have said the poor are always amongst us, but there has to be a better way of helping the homeless without all these middle charities,
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on that, I mean, I think the whole aid sector, there's so much inefficiency at the best case, or corruption at the worst case. I remember one project where we were doing sort of humanitarian ready-to-eat meals, and one of our sponsors had produced a whole bunch and said, okay, let's just give them away. And we went, I think it was to a UN agency, said, look, we've got 100,000 meals, can you just give them away for free? And they're, well, no, we can't. We need to charge you 30% of the value of the food so that we can give it away for free. And it's like, well, hold on, so all this infrastructure. So if you set the price of the food really low, and well, no, it's too low for us, then we're not going to do it. So there's an entire bureaucracy and infrastructure around procurement. And I think aid would probably be an amazing use case for blockchain, value transfer, accountability, governance around it, because it doesn't, if you attract the altruists, the do-gooders are probably actually not the best at necessarily running a business, because you need to think a bit like a business person. And if you're a business person, you're probably missing the altruism gene. And so, there isn't always a nice confluence between the two disciplines, but maybe, I think that could be a good use case for tech.
I think so, because you're right. Because I mean, a lot of charities, as you say, there's a lot of extra weight in there, and there's a lot of bureaucracy, and it's quite scary to think about how much money goes into the charity, and then how much actually goes down to the people that need it. And I know you can't just give money out per se, or maybe you can. I don't know. Maybe there must be a better way of thinking about this, of fixing the problem. And I'm not smart enough to know what it is, but if someone comes and tells me, I'd be very happy to help.
I mean, I think, just a quick, because I saw this clip, this one, LinkedIn, these video clips come up, and they sort of gave like a 100 homeless people. They just gave them some money to see what they would do with it. And they did, and obviously there was some selection bias. They didn't have mental problems or addictions, etc., but just genuinely sort of homeless people. And then they came back to them in a month and they found that they'd sort of cleaned themselves up, living in a small apartment. So a lot of them just need that sort of boost to get back into the system, as opposed to sort of incremental handouts. So your theory about, as long as people are reasonably mentally, well balanced or in a good place, most people, if you give them money in that situation, they're not going to squander it. They know better than the rest of us how precious it is. And so do you need this massive bureaucracy to, for every dollar, only 30 cents gets to the person on the street? I don't know, maybe blockchain, maybe there is a different way somehow.
Yeah, I'd like to think so, because I think blockchain is so transformational in many ways. I'm thinking, here's a real problem. Maybe someone watching this will write into us afterwards and say, here's a project.
Yeah.
Well, Hala, just to follow up on that 30% example, which is kind of interesting. You talk to this IMF people, World Economic Forum people, all those regulators. You have been in touch with them for almost 2 decades. What is the response of the cameras when it comes to cryptocurrency, DeFi? Probably there are two groups of people: the old school, those who are sort of against, and there are just the millennial ones that are sort of embracing the new technology.
So look, I have to qualify my response as speculation, because my days of hobnobbing with the IMF and the World Bank and IIF was more my institutional days, where because of Moody's, I was the head of Middle East banks. I was a true old school sort of CFI type person, and that's that. But it does give me a bit of a sense as to how they think and what their concerns are. And I think there's obviously it's not a simple agenda, but on the one hand, there is a genuine concern about self-interest, money laundering, corruption, and so on. But my personal view is that it's a bit of a boogeyman or a red herring, because if you want to do an audit trail of a crypto coin, you can do it much better than the US dollar. So the technology itself is absolutely in favor of anti-money laundering, KYC. The provenance of that coin, if the parties were willing, you could trace it all the way back to white coins or black coins, white coins being they've originated somewhere where you can track the provenance, and that it's been done in a, for lack of a better word, halal way. And the others, you just join them in a gray area. And I could see quite often they seem to be throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And that's where my sort of more cynical Machiavellian hidden agenda comes into play, where, beyond the military, the most effective means of power is money. And central banking, I only learned this not, a few months ago or a year ago. It's a Marxist concept. Everywhere else, we believe the private sector is a much better allocator of resources and value. But for some reason, we've absolved the fact that actually money is best left in the hands of politicians or supposedly independent central banks who have done a spectacular job of managing it for their own interests. And you can see with all the debt. And I think the breaking of gold standard or tangibility has broken that governance mechanism. And now they're there in the sweet shop, and then they've got unlimited access. So the cynic in me says that the incumbent regulatory powers who manage fiat currencies as a form of, in some ways, rightly balanced economic activity, wrongly in terms of abusing monetary power for political gain, which is what we see time and time again. Right now, we don't believe voters don't respond to prudence. Voters don't respond to managing your debts. Voters love it if you can spend money on everything and worry about the bill later. So it's our kids that will end up paying all these taxes. The population is aging, pension entitlements are unfunded. you want free healthcare, free education, free, which is great, but it just means that other people have to pay for it. And, there's a nice quote: governments are excellent at spending other people's money. That, going to your question around these institutional actors that have been around for so long and are so intermeshed with the existing system, you can't honestly ask them to be objective about a system that they depend on for power. If you had a private sector currency like Bitcoin, and I take the analogy of Napster. I don't know if you remember Napster, right?
Streaming.
They created this guy created a much more efficient music delivery system than the billions of dollars of record companies or recording companies ever did. And because they refused to innovate, they refused to, service the consumer in a way that was favored them. They favored themselves over the consumer. An innovator comes along and shows that actually you can deliver value and so on. And guess what? Music is now streamed everywhere because they had to compete with a private sector innovative solution. Now, for me, the value of cryptocurrency to these big ossified institutions, if you don't get your house in order about how you manage money, about how you manage the economy, well, I've got this private sector alternative that says, you're printing US dollars and you're destroying my wealth. Bitcoin is not, it's preserving my wealth. So you need to run your house as good as Bitcoin or some other private sector mechanism, and then I'll choose your currency. But the governments won't do that, because then they lose a source of power. And so they have to come out and slam cryptocurrency and all, with this boogeyman of AML and all the rest of it. It's very disingenuous. And, we have to see how it plays out, because at least in the US, even though they're abusing the printing presses, they still have the concept of liberal freedom and private sector. And the private sector is, the consumer still is powerful. Go to the other side of the world with our #1 fan of crypto, which happens to be where you are, banning it left, right, and center, because their central bank coin means that I can track every single person, what they're spending, what they're doing in. It's the ultimate form of control. Now, you'll never have that Orwellian 1984 approach in the US, but they both have similar agendas, but the US cannot come out and say it, whereas China just comes out and does it. So that's why I don't think you'll have any fans, frankly, amongst the institution, which is why, sorry to go on, but the last thing about institutional DeFi, the moment you have institutions starting to make money in this space, then actually this cryptoverse becomes part of the acceptable system. And then it becomes much harder to break, because if JP Morgan and HSBC and the central bank of XYZ are in this space, well, then you can't just throw it out. You can't just say it's for criminals. And so I do believe institutional DeFi holds a bit of a promise for a collaborative, complementary approach between the cryptoverse and the old world. But I don't expect the old world to go down without a fight. So let's just see. We're at the very earliest stages. It's a very exciting time to be. But there's a lot of entrenched powers that stand to lose under a new system.
That's kind of interesting historic background, along with the potentially what could happen in the future. Jillian, the industry is aggressively run by males, and you're the advocate of females. How does the participation of females could improve the situation? And what would be the long-lasting social impact in emerging markets, especially in this case, Marhaba is addressing its solution to exclude over 1 billion potential users. What would be your take on that?
I'm so glad you asked me that question. Smiling away here. Two things I want to say. I often give talks, and I start with a joke, And I say, if the Lehman Brothers had been the Lehman Sisters, we might not have had the crash in 2008. And then I had another revelation there recently. I was thinking about this fable. And this kind of speaks to why you need women and diversity. It's not just women, so you need different people. But women being half the population need to be in the decision-making processes here. But you know the old fable of there's 6 or so wise men, but who were blind in a village, and they'd never seen an elephant. So they took a young boy, took him out to meet this elephant. These are 6 wise but blind men. And the first one feels the trunk, and he says, oh, it's like a hose. And another guy feels the side and said, oh, it's like a wall. And someone felt the legs like a tree trunk, and then it was like a rope, and it was like a spear. And this is shown, it's a very well-known fable, right? And I mean, and I only recently thought about it, and it's supposed to show about perspective, which it does very ably. But also I thought, if that had been 6 wise women, they had chatting to each other, and they would have said, guys, it's not a snake, and it's not a rope, and it's an elephant, and this is what it looks like. So I think what women can do is, and I am being stereotypical here, so I apologize, but we're more collaborative, I think, and it's less the softness or the empty, you know, all the different things go on, because I also encourage more men to get into nursing or caring jobs, because that's also very important. But I think bringing women in, well, we also know, sorry, too, as well, that McKinsey, Credit Suisse, and Nordea all did big studies on putting women in positions of power, and I think in decision-making roles in publicly quoted companies, and to a company, their profits went up like between 20 and 30%. And it's just, it's the whole diversity thing, because if you have all people who think the same way, act the same way, went to the same schools, they're going to think the same way and not innovate. It's very hard to innovate if you're all going, oh yeah, yes, that's right, we like this, and we whatever. You bring people who are different and new and who've different perspectives on life. And it's just interesting. So I think this industry is so important, and it's way too important to be left to men alone. I don't know, it's all this new thinking, and I really want women involved, because it also, the other thing too, as well, you said, in disadvantaged areas, if people don't have access to, you know, you've heard this too as well, if you invest in a woman, say maybe especially in a rural, you know, place in an emerging country, if you invest in the women, you educate the women, the women raise up the whole village, the whole community, because they put it back into their children, and then the children, so the whole community rises up. And it's not that men don't look after their children, but it's that, again, studies have proven that you educate the women, you educate the whole village, because the children then become educated. So it's the same way that it's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, I think actually we're 51% women, I think, on this island, on this world, but it's a no-brainer. It makes things better. But I start off with women, but I also mean diversity. So we're so much better now in this world. We're, you know, with LGBTQ people, with disabilities, with you know, different anything, religions, anything. We're becoming, well, some parts of the world we're not, but I think we're becoming more educated to understand that diversity is an amazing, wonderful thing. And while it's lovely to be, like, I'm very proud to be Irish, very proud to be Irish, but I also love that, you know, we've lots of new nationalities coming in here, and it makes for a more interesting world, and you learn stuff. It's just like, wow. So anyway, that's my thing. It's too important to be wasted on men alone, to be shared.
And Jillian, I mean, look, not to endorse your stereotype, but I had a long career in financial services, but I actually had the good fortune of actually having quite a few female managing directors, long career, as well as males. And I actually preferred in this because I found, again, massive stereotypes, just a you know, very small selection bias. I find they were much more interested in consensus versus ego, much more inclined to listen to other opinions. I found even them also sometimes more ethical in terms of their career ambitions. So whereas I tended to find you know, some of the males more politically oriented, as you know, financial services can be quite a, you know, a charged place, whereas, you know, not to say that they weren't career oriented, but they didn't feel like they had to get it by stepping on top of other people. Now, obviously there are exceptions to the rule, and I'm sure, you know, Margaret Thatcher is probably a nice example, but in my experience, it's definitely been a positive, the female managing directors that I've worked with.
I would agree. And it's not, I mean, I've enjoyed working for men and for women too, as well. I see different sides, but it just makes sense. You know, we are a world, and yin and yang, you know, and yeah, it's more jolly, I think. And it's, yeah. And I've nothing against like single sex education or any of the other things that happen, or clubs. People want to do whatever they want to do. It's live and let live. But I do think when it comes for ruling the world, that we need to be all up there at the table.
Yeah, my favorite politician is Jacinda Ardern.
Oh, do you know what I love about her? And I'll jump across too. She said, and you mentioned it earlier, I was going to come back to you. She was talking about growth, and you were saying about, you know, endless growth. That's not possible. And she said the same too. Why does everybody judge a country on its GDP? She said, why not? Is there not a happiness quotient? Is there not a well-being, you know, a fitness, you know? So it's not, GDP is not the only way to judge the success of a country. And this is like about 6-7 years ago. I went, wow,
yeah.
Wow,
yeah.
She's some woman.
Well, if you, Khalid with you, and then Jillian could give a concluding sort of idea or statement, or by just sort of covering. So there's the blockchain part of it, there is the social impact part of it, there is the equality part of it. What would be concluding idea that you want our audience to go away with?
So look, the existing financial system, I think the first interest lending bank started in Italy somewhere maybe like 500 years ago. And I, you know, as someone who isn't a particularly optimistic person, you know, about the world, about the situation, because I'm too neck deep in some of the problems. Like I had a ringside seat at the last crisis. I genuinely feel that through the use of blockchain, decentralized finance, done in the right way, in a way that protects consumers, in a way that doesn't allow for money laundering, etc. For the first time in 500 years, you know, we can have a better peer-to-peer financial and economic system that can liberate low-income communities, middle-income communities, share the wealth. You know, the idea of having a centralized entity that controls everything in the country, it goes completely against capitalism. You know, a community in, you know, the tail end of Cornwall has nothing in common necessarily with a community at the northern end of Scotland, for example, and that's just in one country. Imagine the EU with the ECB. It's a complete disaster to tie everybody into the same straitjacket. Now, fine, have that straitjacket, but if you've got peer-to-peer DeFi running at micro communities and macro communities, you can let the rest of the world carry on the macro level, but DeFi can empower people really at that bottom level. And yeah, the thing I want to convey, I think we are at a potentially transformative part in history, even more powerful than the internet was, to be honest. You know, the blockchain can be a transfer of value, an economic value mechanism transfer, not just data. And that will be a liberalization factor for everyone if we get it right.
Wow, I endorse everything you're saying, and you say it very articulately and eloquently. The thing that I normally say, Amir, when I sort of give a sort of takeaway message, whatever, to people, because there's still so much FUD around the place, and people and sort of scamming, not scamming type, but sort of scaremongering that it's all a Ponzi scheme and it's full of criminals and all the rest of it. What I like to say to people is, look at me. I'm a middle-aged, middle-class lady. Nothing scary about me, and I love this industry. You know what I mean? So I'm not an anarchist, and I don't know. I'm very boring, but I love it. So I like to give people the permission to come on in too as well, because if someone like me can like it, well, then it can't be all bad.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with your wisdom, Jillian and Khalid. I hope, on behalf of Synopsis 2021, this is the inception of your future presence and participation on the panel and probably keynotes. Thank you once again for your time. And we truly hope that our audience will benefit from the ideas and insight you have shared. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Cheers, Amirsan.